I'm Tony Houston. I'm the local history librarian here at Blodgett Library, and today we're doing another episode of Your Story is Fishkill's Story. Today we have Glen Sneyd, who's a lifelong Fishkill resident, former Fishkill Building Inspector, and he's here to tell us about growing up in Fishkill. Glen, you're a lifelong Fishkill resident. Where did you start out your Fishkill story?
I was born, I want to say I was born in Glenham because that's where my parents lived when I was born. We rented an apartment. I was a baby. My parents rented an apartment in what's known as the Bernius House, a house that was even old at that time. I was actually born in Vassar Hospital in Poughkeepsie. We weren't quite still having babies in the field, but that's where I started out, and which is curious because I've come full circle and now live about 5 houses down from that on the same street.
You said you lived in Glenham. What was Glenham like then?
Fishkill in general was quite different. It was mostly rural, largely farmland and timberland. I can remember as a child hiding in the bushes in the farm fields along Old Glenham Road, where there are now apartments and housing developments, watching the farmers on their big old tractors plowing their fields. We used to forage and play along the Fishkill Creek and the Wappingers Creek. Actually, this is her. This is my maternal grandmother, Mildred Evangeline Prevatil, later Mickley, married my grandfather, whose name was Mickley. Czechoslovakian immigrant. She lived on Red Schoolhouse Road, near the prison, near the Matawan prison. And right in her backyard was the Stony Kill farm, what's now the Stony Kill Nature Preserve. And it was entirely a working farm at that time with herds of cattle. And we used to go and ice skate on the cattle ponds. It was very Currier and Ives. My grandmother would take us walking all through the property and teaching us about wild plants and wildlife and herbal medicines, things you can eat, things that only a grandmother, a farm girl from Czechoslovakia who'd immigrated as a child long, long ago would know.
Was the schoolhouse still there?
The schoolhouse was still there, and it was fascinating. It was like a little time capsule. It looked as though it was locked. You couldn't go inside, but if you peered through the windows, it looked as though the class had just dismissed for the day. The desks were there with papers and pencils on them. There was still writing on the chalkboard. It was marvelous, and unfortunately that was demolished and went away when they widened the intersection there between Red Schoolhouse and Route 9D.
Where did you go to school?
I started out at the Fishkill Elementary School. I went there through elementary school, and then went to the Wappingers Junior High in Wappingers. From there to Ketchum High, and about halfway through high school, they finished John Jay High in East Fishkill, and I graduated from John Jay. At that time, as it is now, the Wappingers Central School District was quite a large school district, a sprawling school district that encompassed 3 townships, East Fishkill, Fishkill, and Wappingers. And my cohort and cohorts around us, we grew up feeling that if you went to any of the schools in that district, you were essentially the same group of kids, the same group of people. And we traveled throughout Fishkill, Wappingers, East Fishkill, played. That was our playground. And there were no bounds to it beyond as far as we could walk or bicycle in a day. Before they constructed the Duchess Mall, the now gone Duchess Mall, and we were invited to do an archaeological dig because that had been during the Revolutionary War, the famous encampment and supply depot for the American forces. And we were allowed to go in as several classes of Fishkill Elementary and bring along our shovels, our little hand shovels, and dig as much as we wanted to and look for artifacts. Of course, all we did was get real dirty and come back to school real dirty. Didn't find anything, but it was a great deal of fun.
If people weren't farmers, what jobs did they have?
The major employers then, in those ancient of days, were Texaco Research, the now largely demolished Texaco Research on Old Glenham Road, Central Hudson, the telephone company, and the 2 large prisons in the area, Greenhaven and Matawan. Downstate had not yet been built at that time, and Matawan was what was referred to at that time as a prison for the criminally insane. So most folks in the area were either employed at one of those facilities, or they were essentially the support community for the people who did work at those facilities.
You said you roamed around and played in the creeks and the fields. Was there a favorite spot in the Fishkill Creek you like to go to?
One of our favorite haunts as children was there was an old dam, a colonial era dam behind the Blue Seal Feeds and Needs store in East Fishkill, or is that Fishkill? Actually, I'm not really sure. Behind there's the architectural artifact of a colonial dam. I believe it was Star Mill, and there was just barely discernible the rift in the water, the drop in the water where the dam used to be, and the old concrete sluices that ran the mill wheels. And the fishing and swimming was great in that spot. If you can believe it, there were still beaver in the Fishkill and Wappingers Creeks. However, the Hudson River, because that's where everyone's chemical waste from factories and sewers dumped, was quite dirty, it was murky. Well, that was before the Clearwater organization got in and was instrumental in getting the river cleaned up. We were told, the old timers used to tell us, don't swim in the Hudson River, because if you swim in the Hudson River, you're going to get polio. Everyone who goes in the river gets polio. Did you take the ferry across the Hudson? I did. It scared the heck out of me. I didn't like the ferry because, again, the waters were so murky. It was like roiling mud where the big propellers of the old ferry used to churn them up behind the boat. But that was before the bridge between Beacon and Newburgh. And it was our only access across the river, so yes, we rode it quite often. I actually got to ride on the final voyage of the Alexander Hamilton sidewheeler. A friend of mine, an older friend of mine, was a member of a steamship society, and he finagled his way with the captain to get us into the wheelhouse of the boat. Got to watch the captain piloting the boat. And the captain personally took us out into the big boxes that house the side wheels, the paddle wheels for the boat. We're standing up again with the big wheels churning around in front of us, and took us down into the engine room where the steam engine was. And the steam engines are massive. They're unbelievably large in those boats. And we got to watch a fascinating process of the guy who would grease the engine when the connecting rods, which were these huge steel rods about this big around, would come up and down, and they're piloting the boat. They're turning the wheels, and as they would come up, there was a little cap on the end, and he'd give it a half a turn, and it'd go back down and come back up, and he'd give it a half a turn, and eventually he'd pop the cap off and slap a big blob of grease in it, and then start the process over, putting the cap on. Put it on, half a turn, wait till it comes up again, half a turn. And with steam blowing, it was just like a gigantic version of the African Queen. So if you saw the bridges being built, you obviously saw Route 9 and 84 being built. That was one of the major factors in changing this area from rural to what it is now, a commuter hub, a business hub for this region. I saw Route 9 widened down through past Greenfly Swamp, taking out a small community, I believe, there. And when 84 went in, that coinciding with the bridge being built across the Hudson, it quite opened the place up, became a different town at that time. So how did you get your first job as Fishkill's building inspector? I got that job because as a very young man, I was 24 years old at the time, I was a house framer, a carpenter. And I was doing some odd jobs for Don Yellen, who was the late Don Yellen, who was the owner of Jamestown Farms Apartments on Jackson Street in the village of Fishkill. And so I had an apartment there, and he just had me working here and there about his apartments, and showed up at my apartment one night because I didn't know, but he was planning to retire, and said, "Hey Glenn, I got a harebrained idea. How'd you like to be a building inspector?" And not knowing anything about anything, I said, "Sure, what's it pay?" Which turned out to be not much, but took the job, and the rest was history for me. He was a full-time building inspector. I became his assistant for a couple of years until he retired. And then I was at 24, well, by then 25, 26 years old, I was the youngest building inspector in the town of Fishkill the one youngest they'd ever had. Actually, I had this. This is actually a news clipping of when that happened. That's me and Don Yellen. And fun fact, the newspaper reporter asked us to look at a set of plans as though we were reading them. The plans are actually upside down in this picture.
So what was the building code like when you started?
As the town building inspector, and this was true of all, and still is of all municipal building inspectors, town, villages, you might work for the town, you might be employed by the town or the village, but you enforced the state building code. Now, back in those days, it was really a fly-by-the-seat-of-your-pants job because, and this is it, an example of, this little guy is the building code from back then when I was started as a building inspector in 1979. Now today, the building code is about 7 or 8 volumes like this. It's actually so large that it's getting difficult to get it in paper. You can largely only get it online. That's actually true of a lot of town codes now, and municipal, city, village codes, is that they're just becoming so large, you can't get them in print. It's not viable to put them out in print anymore. You can't afford them, you can't afford to print them.
So besides being building inspector, what other jobs did you have?
Before the town diversified all of those jobs into other departments, I had to do basically everything that the police department or dog catcher didn't enforce. I had to administer and enforce timber harvesting, dumping, property maintenance, septic systems, swine, pigs. That was a very odd and large part of my job back then because, again, it was a very rural area and it wasn't at all uncommon for folks to keep their, just like you see in the Little House on the Prairie books, to keep their 1 pig a year that they would raise and then slaughter in the fall for their winter and spring meat. But in the town, under local law, you had to have a permit in order to do that, and there were certain minimal standards for how you kept your pigs so you wouldn't annoy your neighbors. And I would have to go around periodically as swine inspector and inspect everyone's pigsties and say, yep, that's a pigsty.
Where was your office?
My office was in the old town hall, it's now a wine bar in the village of Fishkill. That was originally, before it was the old town hall, a bank. It was and still is a beautiful brownstone brick building with humongous iron shutters on the outside so they could lock the place up at night. And my office was on the upper floor in the very back of the building where the fire escape stairs ran down the back of the building, which was wonderfully convenient because if the crush of people waiting to get building permits and ask me questions outside, it was like Indiana Jones slipping out the window when all his students are banging at his door. I'd just go out the door and run down the fire escape to get out on my inspections for the day.
So when you started all of this, we didn't have the technology we had today, so what kind of equipment did you have to work with?
There was practically no technology back then. I was lucky enough to have one of the very first Texas Instruments handheld calculators. It only had about 3 functions. We did when we made up, in the building department, when we made up permits and forms, we'd actually have the secretary do them. I'd longhand write them out. My secretary would type them up on a manual typewriter, and we would literally cut and paste pieces of paper together and then put them on the copy machine and make official documents and permits and forms to give out to the public. If we got lost, if I was out in my car and like the forest ranger and I did get lost, I was just lost. I'd have to find my way back. There was no calling anybody on the cell phone. If I was late or a contractor was running late, there was no calling up on the cell phone and saying, hey, I'll catch you in a little while, I'm running late, whatever. We just work around it.
Did you have to inspect any of IBM's sites?
I did. It wasn't actually in my jurisdiction. The IBM complex is in East Fishkill, but my local building inspector professional organization, the New York State Building Officials Conference, NISBOC, had us do a tour we were invited to do a tour of what was their large brand new, still under construction semiconductor facility on site, and it was mind-boggling, not only because of its size, but the complexity and the precision of how it had to be not only super clean, but super vibration-free. They showed us how when they made the foundation of the place, they built this, it wasn't just concrete poured in the ground, big blobs of concrete or cinder blocks, what normal foundations are. It was this monstrous, incredibly deep, honeycombed concrete network of structures that went down forever to eternity, so that there wouldn't be the slightest vibration in the nano-level semiconductor chips that their machines were creating. We had to wear the bunny suits, the clean suits, going in to do the tour.
So did anyone ever try to pull rank and say, you know, I'm a very important person, you need to do my inspection?
Yes, it occasionally happened. I occasionally had a notable, a local important citizen who were really not quite as important as they thought they were to be hopping up and down yelling at a planning board meeting that their job should really go through more quickly, and I would have to explain to them, I'm very sorry, but I have a really big pile of work, and you're in my pile, I'll get to you. And town councilmen occasionally would come out on a job and say, you really need to move this along, you really need to approve it, this file is fairly important, and I'd again have to calmly explain, no, I'm sorry, I really can't do that, it's illegal. And it's not in anybody's best interest for the building inspector to pass something that might not be safe. I was actually building inspector in the town of Fishkill 2 separate times, and in my second tour of duty, when I got in, they were just starting to build the new town hall, the current town hall for the town of Fishkill. And I didn't know it, but the building inspector before me had approved the building without an elevator. Now, it's a 2-floor building, and New York State had already adopted an equivalent law to the federal ADA, and they had to have an elevator. If an able-bodied person could move between floors, a disabled-bodied person had to be able to move between floors, which was really important because the senior center was on the lower floor and all of the other facilities were on the upper floor. And I dragged out the plans and looked, and there's no elevator in this building. So I went to the town board and I said, guys, we have a problem here, a substantial problem. It has to be rectified before the building gets too much bigger, because it gets more costly as the building gets more built. There's no elevator, you need to have one. And a couple of days later, the town supervisor came up to my office and handed me, no kidding, it was just the little torn off corner of a piece of legal pad with in pencil written, the town board has decided to take its chances with the elevator. I couldn't do that. I mulled it over a little. What was I going to do? Because these were my bosses. I know I'm enforcing state law, but these are the people who pay my paycheck. They sign my check. So I went back down to the town board and the town supervisor and again said, gentlemen, I just can't do this. Not only is it ethically and morally wrong, but again, it's just illegal. A couple of years later, the case came up before the State Board of Review, the State Regional Board of Review that was held appropriately in an insane asylum across the river in New City. And the architects who had designed the town hall without the elevator represented the town, and there was a board of state representatives, like a tribunal, and the town was just roundly castigated for not putting in the elevator. There was just no justifying it. The people on the board were literally saying, how could you be so heartless to do this? Of course, the architects were, to the best they could, trying to justify what they had done. Well, we have this nice ramp that comes up the outside of the building. Unfortunately, the picture that they held up for the Board of Review to see was a picture of the ramp, and they said, well, what's this stuff in the ramp? And it was sandbags, because they had to sandbag the ramp off every time it rained because it flooded. And the board was they were face-palming. And they lost big, and I felt so justified. And for years after that, the employees at the town hall tell me that they referred to the elevator as the Glen Sneyd Memorial Elevator, because they did have to put one in.
So it sounds like a lot of your work as a building inspector was actually going back and correcting work that had already been done.
Oh yeah, well, as a building inspector, you're always in an adversarial position with people. People don't like you telling them what they have to do on their own property, but once in a while you have to do something that's really unpleasant. And I one time had to tell St. Mary's Church in the village of Fishkill that they had to tear down their convent. Now that, on its face, seems like a real problem. I had coming in as the building inspector. Again, the building inspector before me had gone through a zoning board of appeals process with the St. Mary's Church when they built the new current St. Mary's Church building. And as part of a zoning variance that they had to get, they were required, as a condition of building the church, they had to tear down a building that was right smack next to it, which was their convent. But they never did it. They just never got around to it. And then years later, I come in as building inspector, and I find this letter in the file and this decision that says these guys were supposed to tear down their convent. And I said, okay, well, we need to get this done then. This is a legally binding document. And I sent them an order, which is nothing anyone ever wants to receive. And an order to tear down your convent is something they less want to receive. So that was big. It was big in the newspapers. It was quite a to-do. I had lots and lots of parishioners storming my office and little old ladies yelling at me, "What do you think you're doing to our church?" The church people, the church hierarchy, the priests and the administrators of the church were actually quite good about it. They said, they looked at it and said, you know what, you're right, we were required to do this. And they did move their nuns to a different place and tore down the convent eventually.
So now you're retired and you're remodeling your own 1850s Glenham house. How is it from the other side?
Yes, it's interesting. It's humbling being on the other side of the building inspector's desk, because as a private citizen, I have to, like everybody else, go get a building permit, get my stuff inspected. I'm hoping to put an addition on my house eventually, and again, I'll have to go through the whole process that anyone else would have to do, and I'm not enjoying it any more than anyone else would.
Well, thanks for coming in today, Glenn. I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize how much Fishkill has changed just in our lifetimes, from a very rural area to the suburban area it is now, especially people who've come recently. You hear of Fishkill's colonial history, and you think of it now with IBM and strip malls and 84, and just don't realize how recent a lot of the changes are. So it's been fascinating to hear your stories. I've certainly learned a lot.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed doing this, and this is a wonderful program. I hope you're able to continue with it, and I wish you the best of success.
Thank you. Well, tune in next time for our next episode of Your Story is Fishkill's Story.